Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Emily Sprenger. I am an academic trainer for the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'm very excited today to have Dr. Cie Armstead here. She earned her doctorate through NCU. We're very proud to have an alumni host a webinar for us today entitled, How to Do You? Leverage cultural identity and self-care for career success. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Please remember that this webinar is being recorded and we will post it in the Center for Teaching and Learning in the Commons. Usually we do that within a 24-hour period. I will go ahead and just remind you at this time that Dr. Armstead is very open to any questions that you want to post in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll address those at the end. And without further ado, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I will pass this over to Dr. Armstead.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Emily. And I am so excited to be here today. This is the perfect way for me to conclude the workday by sharing with the NCU family. I would like to thank North Central University's Center for Teaching and Learning for this opportunity to share with you. In this unprecedented time that we find ourselves in, the research and lived experiences on cultural identity and self-care are even more critical for career success and even essential for maintaining any degree of sanity and normalcy. So I hope that everyone who is in attendance today will be able to glean at least 2 or 3 takeaways, something that you can identify with, something that resonates for you, that you can use in your career as well as in your personal life. And I'm hoping that this will be a catalyst for you to research more. I am talking to a university community, so hopefully there are a few of you all out there like me, a bit nerdy, and that I like research. I like digging deeper to find out about a phenomenon or something that has been studied that previously I didn't even know it was a thing. And then I find out that not only does it exist, but there's research that has been done around it. So I hope this afternoon, as we explore how cultural and social identity can influence how you do you, how you show up, I hope that something will resonate that will encourage you to dig a bit deeper, because in this relatively short period of time, I'll only be able to introduce some ideas or maybe remind you of some things you've already become aware of. And then for you to take that information in a very practical way and apply it to your career, your job, but for me, even more importantly, to your experiences. Right now, this world that we live in, this world that we exist in, this world that some days I can just barely make it through. Right now, I need those things that are going to help me stay grounded. And so if you, like me, find yourself from time to time in this COVID environment, this environment of multiple pandemics, if you find yourself searching for some sanity, some peace, then I hope that you will listen today to hear those things that are particularly relevant to you. So let's jump in. I'm used to talking to live audiences where I get feedback and I can see the nonverbal communications. So I'm just going to pretend that I see you all seated, eager and ready to receive. So let's jump in, and we will start with me being able to change the slide. There we are. Who are you? Who are you? So let me introduce myself. Most of the time, I am Cie Armstead. Sometimes to my close friends and families, family, I am Dr. C, since I earned my doctorate in business administration from North Central University in 2019, so not too long ago. To my closest friends, I'm also known as Comma, or sometimes to my husband, he has a few other names for me that I won't go into here. I am also a sister, a daughter. I'm a supervisor at work. I am a direct report to my supervisor. I am a bestest to my closest friend. I am a avid roller skater. I have a lot of identities, just like you do. We all are different people in different places. And so our identities, how we identify ourselves, is critically important to how we show up. And in this context, I'm going to talk mainly about work, but again, it applies to other places. How we see ourselves makes a big difference in how we do what we do. And I know from my own experience, as well as research around social identity, it is fluid and that it evolves over time. The person that I know myself as today is different from 10 years ago. Now, there are still some core values. There's still the inside that for the most part is the same or has matured some, but there are other aspects that have evolved. It's fluid based on context, and we'll talk about that a little later. So I invite you right now to think about, who are you and how do you show up, and who determines who you are? Many of us, consciously or unconsciously, we hold an identity of ourselves based significantly on external voices, based on external forces. Now, that's not automatically good or bad. It just is. It is what it is, right? But when we realize how that influences what we do and how we show up, it can make a difference. Let me give you an example. As I was going through who I am, I did not mention one of my identities, well, from a long time ago, was Cookie. When I was in sixth grade, yes, a long time ago, when I was in sixth grade, I had an opportunity to go on a special weekend training, and it was some educational opportunity. And I was the only person of color there. It was far away from where I lived, and we were like in a outdoor area, and I was the only person of color there. So I decided that I was going to be Cookie that weekend. Now, I don't remember all the reasons why my name was going to be Cookie, but I know one of the reasons was that I was trying to fit in with my peers that weekend. And from my sixth grade perspective, they all had sort of cute sounding names, and I wanted to be part of it. I know now that that was okay. Again, no judgment. But I also know now that that was a process where I sort of minimized part of who I was so that I could better fit into that context. Again, no judgment, but it's a reality. And I recognize now I don't go to quite that extreme, but there are places and times where who I choose to be is based on external voices and forces. Now, as I've matured, I've learned too that there are times when I will not modify who I am. And it's left up to whomever to decide what they do with that. So I ask you, what is your social identity? How do you identify? Are you on the job? How do you show up at work? Now, some of you all may be familiar with this term. It's called code switching. CODE, code switching. And in very layman's terms, basically it means changing how you show up based on the context. It is often, it often applies for those from marginalized or underrepresented groups, that we learn how to change who we are to better accommodate whatever setting that we are in. Again, no judgment, but it is something to be aware of, because once I learned about it, and this holds true for the research I did too, around social identity. Once you know about it, you have a choice on whether or not it's going to be an asset or a liability. Code switching. It's an asset, both from my experience as well as the research. The scholarly literature speaks to it as an asset, because it can help you be flexible in your environment. Clear example of this is when the pandemic hit in March, April of this year. Many of those leaders from marginalized groups, underrepresented groups, those who had learned how to effectively leverage their social identity, they were much better equipped to handle the volatile situation, because they've already learned how to be flexible, how to not get so excited when everything is changing quickly, because they've been doing that much of their career. Right along with flexible, knowing how to adapt makes you more adaptable. Knowing how to code switch can make you more adaptable. You have an ability to interact with different types of people. Example, good friend of mine in a professional setting, she is blessed to be able to speak more than one language. One of her languages is Spanish. She's Hispanic. And I've seen her in different settings where we, for example, on a business trip in a hotel setting, and some of the employees in the hotel, they spoke Spanish as their only or their primary language. She was able to interact with them in a way I couldn't. And having that ability to interact with different people is an asset. She was able to leverage her social identity in that way. And so having that skill can be an asset. However, code switching, knowing how to, or doing it automatically and not even recognizing it, changing who you are, how you show up, can also be a liability if you're not aware of it, or if you haven't learned how to leverage it. It can be a liability because it can be seen as you're not being authentic. And it can also cause internal discord, where you may ask yourself, am I being true to my real self? Research has shown that many of those from marginalized or underrepresented groups, they may find that when they adapt to these different environments, their close friends, their family members may question their allegiance to their original community. For many of us from the African-American community, the phrase that is used is, if you're, for example, if when you're with your friends, you say, hey, what's up? How you doing, girl? Back in the day, they used to call that ebonics, when you're very comfortable in your speech, when you're with your friends, but then when you move to your professional setting, you assume the proper language and you make sure you enunciate all your words and you have your professional voice on. Then some of your friends from the neighborhood may say, and I'm sure some in the audience are familiar with this, they'll say, oh, she forgot where she came from. Or the extreme of it, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but this is just real talk. They may hear, oh, you're trying to be white. So code switching can be an asset. And when it helps you be flexible and adaptable, interact with different people, be able to thrive in those volatile, uncertain times. not using code switching in an appropriate way can cause you to come off as being not authentic, not true to your original friends and family. So that's an example of learning to leverage this social identity piece. I offer you two themes to consider: tool or weapon, and the second being finding your balance. When you learn to leverage your social identity as a positive tool, even when others may try to use it as a weapon, you can use it as an asset in your career. Your social identity can be used as a tool that helps you maintain your authentic self and engage in different environments with different people in a way that makes you comfortable and also helps to make others comfortable. On the other hand, not being aware of how your social identity influences what you do and how you do what you do, it can become a weapon that is wielded by others, or sometimes a weapon that we use against ourselves unintentionally, but those self-inflicted wounds of not knowing how our social identity fits into our current environment. So, a story I'll share with you. My dissertation research involved interviewing senior level healthcare leaders from African American backgrounds who have ascended to the highest positions in their careers. And it was a qualitative study that looked at the competencies, those skills, attributes, talents that they had mastered in order to help them ascend to the highest level of their profession. One of my interviewees, a tall African-American man with a deep voice, looked pretty good too. He told the story of how his physical presence made some people, many people, uncomfortable. He told the story of how he first recognized that that was a factor, one of those nonverbal, sort of implicit characteristics that was influencing his career, because just him walking into the room gave some people a reaction even before they knew anything about him. So he told me of how he recognized relatively early in his career that that was a factor that could either be a tool or a weapon. And over time, he learned to use it as a tool. He gave the example of he would, when interacting with individuals who were much shorter than him, or just a little bit shorter because he was so tall, he was taller than most, that he would intentionally take meetings seated. So when a person came into his office, he was already seated in a space away from his desk at a table so that they could be on more even ground, just to give the other person a sense that there was some commonality there. He also talked about learning to use that social identity as a tool when he needed to be more forceful, if you will, when he needed to establish his presence as a CEO. He would use his height and his presence as an asset. So that's one example of becoming aware of how you show up, your social identity, learning how to use it as an effective tool and how to counter it when you or someone outside of yourself may be using it as a weapon. The second theme I want to touch base on is finding your balance. Finding your balance. For those of us from marginalized and underrepresented groups, including women, it's not uncommon for us to feel off balance in certain settings, especially in this current environment where there's so much outside of us that's off balance. So I offer to you as we continue today to think about how something applies to you, or maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't apply to you, then absolutely leave it here, or maybe set it in the back of your mind, because it may apply to someone you know, or it may apply to one of your direct reports. So taking this information and helping you to find the balance, and balance often shows up for me as a concept that has a continuum. So for example, going back to that code switching, for me is finding the balance of when I do it, not doing it so much that it feels artificial, I'm not being authentic, but not going to the other extreme of not using it, the ability to adapt to my advantage. So those two themes as we continue to explore this information today. Are you imitating life when you are not authentically yourself? For those who enjoy classic movies, or some of us old enough to remember them, you may recognize this scene. This was and is a classic known as Imitation of Life. And it told the story of an aspiring actress who befriends a widow who happens to be a Black woman who is a housemaker, a maid, if you will. And they become friends, and they both have young daughters, and they grow up together. The daughters grow up together. Well, the Black woman's daughter is very light-skinned. And as she matures, she chooses to pass. And some of us know what that means, that she was light-skinned enough that she could pass as white. And the story unfolds of her life with her mother, and how her mother, out of respect for her daughter, allowed her daughter to pass. So that meant that the daughter would often in public not acknowledge her mother as her mother, because then of course she wouldn't be able to pass. It's an impactful story, and it's a story that really illustrates the challenges of social identity. How do you see yourself, and how do others see you? And unfortunately, in this movie, this young lady who chose to not embrace her social identity as a woman of color caused a lot of angst for not only herself, but also those around her. So in our workplaces, I ask the question, when you don't allow yourself to be authentically yourself, are you living a rich, full life? Are you bringing the best of what you are to your jobs, to your careers? In the diversity and inclusion profession, one of the basic tenets is that diversity in an organization is an asset to the organization. When an organization has a robust, rich complement of diverse perspectives, diverse experiences, diverse backgrounds, it produces better work results, better outcomes. And research has shown us numerous times that better outcomes are produced when diverse perspectives are brought into the equation. Now that's balanced off with the need for organizations that have this diversity to build inclusive environments. Because as I'm sure many of you all know, maybe from experience, that an organization can have diversity, but not effective inclusion. And what often happens is it produces a revolving door. The diverse individuals, those from different backgrounds, those who are not part of the majority group in the organization, if they come into the organization, and they don't feel welcomed. They don't encounter the sense of belonging. They don't encounter equitable access. They don't have a fair voice in what happens. Then either they often choose to leave because they feel they cannot be their authentic selves, or, and I think personally, this oftentimes is the least favorable option, they choose to stay, but they don't bring their authentic selves to work. They don't bring the value of them having a diverse background to the work that they do. So basically, they're only imitating life. And that ends up most of the time not only not being good for the organization, it's not good for the individual. This session has the title of self-care. It is so important, and again, I know this from lived experience as well as my own research and the research of so many others, that it is essential for psychological self-care to be in an environment where most of the time you feel that you are safe enough to be you. The opposite of that is if you are in a psychologically unhealthy space, that can take such a toll on you as a person, as well as on your ability to produce your best work. So it is essential to self-care that as much as we have any control over it as individuals, that we first understand who we are, then we learn to accept and embrace who we are, and then we bring our full selves to the workplace. Now, caution, that still does mean respecting the organizational culture. Every organization has a culture that applies to everyone. That still does mean maintaining the professionalism that is appropriate for that organization. And it does mean that there are some parameters around what we do in the organization. With that said, however, being in a psychologically unhealthy workplace does not allow us to be our best. So I will move on because that is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've just seen the damage that can be done when we don't show up as our authentic selves. I want to share with you this concept that for me, this was an eye-opener when I discovered it in the research. This concept of racial identity-based impression management, RIM. It is a phenomenon, and it speaks of how those from racially diverse backgrounds have learned to monitor their identity-related behaviors, those things that we do that are a reflection of our cultural background. Those who have any degree of career success have most likely learned how to manage their identity-related behaviors. RIM is a strategic process where the individual uses both visible and non-visible, non-verbal cues about their racial identity to influence how others perceive their racial identity category and characteristics. So let me give you an example. And again, I'm going to go out here and push the envelope a bit, but it's okay. Hairstyle. Women of color, particularly Black African-American women, we can wear our hair a whole lot of different ways. And sometimes it is a conscious choice to not wear a certain hairstyle in certain places. I spent 24 years in the legal profession. And in many areas of the law, it's a very conservative, lowercase c, environment. And I remember this was a couple decades ago, working with young lawyers and young African-American law students and young lawyers, women who wondered if their braided hair would be appropriate in a courtroom or in a corporate office, law office. And unfortunately, oftentimes they did have to change their hairstyle in order to fit in. That was their choice, though. And that's a very vivid and visible example of monitoring our identity-related behaviors. But it shows up in other ways. I've heard of some of my Hispanic friends in professional settings. One in particular, I think of Nancy was her name, or is her name, and she chose not to bring to work for lunch certain ethnic foods because of the smell and just what she thought it represented. It was her choice because she wanted to project a certain presence in the professional, and that was the legal environment. So this concept of racial identity-based impression management, it is a thing. And one of the ways that successful, depending on how you define success, but traditionally successful professionals have learned how to use this realm is in helping others be comfortable with that individual's racial background. What do I mean? The hair example is one where those African-American young lawyers who chose to modify their hair, they were doing that so that others would be more comfortable with their presence. But it shows up in a lot of ways. I know some of my friends in the LGBTQ community, they choose to not be as flamboyant in their work environment, not for themselves, but to help others be more comfortable with their sexual orientation. So again, no judgment. It's you either leveraged as a tool or a weapon. When you are thriving, you choose to adapt, to modify how you show up, working on that rim. You recognize that it's your choice. So you are in the driver's seat, and you know that you are still being true to who you are. When you're just barely surviving, when you're not even conscious of it, or you feel more like you are a victim, that others are making you do this, you may feel like you're selling your soul to be on the job. That's not a healthy place to be. That is not a form of self-care. So this is one of those examples of balance. Each person has to decide for themselves where their balancing act is on this identity-based impression management. A true story for myself. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My family is from around Memphis. So I had a lot of Southern influence. I used to say I had a double Southern accent. South side of Chicago, Memphis, Tennessee. For many, many years in my early career, I saw that as a liability. I did not embrace that part of my social identity. I saw it as a tool that I often used against me, against myself. And so it was a liability. Oftentimes when I would be in professional settings, I would be over concerned about how I was speaking. So therefore I could hardly speak at all. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Fast forward later in my career, I decided to address it differently. I decided to polish up who I was. So that was a good thing. I embraced my social identity. I invested in a speech coach. And then I said, you know what? I am going to speak as well as I choose to, and I'm going to be all right with having a Southern accent. And I learned how to use it to my benefit. So the key point from this RIM concept is it's your choice on whether you thrive or just barely survive. The time is ticking, so let me move on to another concept from my research as well as other research around social identity. And this is the concept of cultural identity backlash. That is those leaders, those professionals who have learned how to embrace their social identity. They have learned how to project confidence in the face of identity backlash. What does that mean? That means when you are in a professional setting and you get some significant pushback, or maybe more implicit. We're all familiar with the term implicit bias, unconscious bias. It might be more undercover, but you get some pushback that you're pretty sure it is happening because of your social or your cultural identity. Those who have learned how to leverage and embrace their social identity, they have learned how to project confidence when they encounter that. They know how to internally generate that confidence. So starting from within. And that's essential because oftentimes we will not receive external validation from those around us on our own abilities. And so we have to generate it from within ourselves, that confidence that almost makes us feel invincible, especially when external forces and voices are pushing back. So how does that show up? Here's an example. One of my research interviews was with a woman of color. She was in a high-level position in a major Chicago hospital. And she told the story of having a direct report, someone who reported to her, that on numerous occasions, in a very blatant way, was insubordinate, just did not give her props, if you will. And she said at first, she tried not to attribute it to her race and gender, but as time went on, some things made it real apparent that that was what was happening. But she started out making sure that she did not acknowledge that to her employee. In other words, she didn't say, wait a minute, you're doing that just because I'm a Black woman. She was confident in her position as a senior leader to address it based on his performance. And she talked about her own personal network that she tapped into to make sure she took care of herself, meaning that she had her private network, sister girls, if you will, where she could talk more openly about what was going on and then strategize how she would deal with it. That was one part of her self-care. And she talked about the need to project that confidence when she was interacting with this insubordinate person, when others were around, whether they were other employees or other supervisors, because all of that came into play. And she used her social identity and her position to make certain that not only did she take care of herself, but that she gave that employee a fair chance. Eventually, that person did end up firing themselves But it was a clear example of that skill of projecting confidence in the face of identity backlash. So that's another, again, if you want to dig deeper, that is a competency that much research has been done about. Moving on, I want to talk about another influential woman. Some of you all may recognize her. In her book, Becoming, Michelle Obama spoke about the need to be twice as good. She spoke about when she was in college that she quietly but unswervingly focused on achievement, bent on checking every box. She assessed her goals and analyzed her outcomes and counted her wins so that she could prove to herself that she qualified. And still, after all of that, she would ask herself, am I good enough? And she found herself still trying to answer that question. So first of all, I totally commend her and appreciate her writing that down, because that's the type of honesty that helps a lot of others. And obviously she is extremely successful, but it helps to hear that she had those same concerns that many of us do. So successful leaders from underrepresented and marginalized groups, they have learned how to have that internal dialogue and do the things that will help them confirm as much as we need to that we do qualify. But it's important, again, in the realm of self-care to recognize the psychological toll that it takes to strive to be perfect. And then even after all of that pursuit of perfectionism, to still wonder if you qualify. I am so very grateful to my dissertation work at NCU. When I was deep into dissertation writing and really wondering, do I qualify? Am I good enough? I was blessed to encounter one of the webinars on preparing to write your dissertation. And something there really resonated for me, and I dug deeper to get more information. And it was about being a dissertation writer. I needed to accept that I would not produce the perfect document, that I did not need to produce the perfect document. I'm sure some of you all are familiar with that phrase. The best dissertation is a done dissertation. So all I needed to do was finish it good enough. Now that just made me, oh my goodness, I'm used to excellence. I must pursue perfection. But I'm so grateful that I was able to let go of that mindset. And that acceptance of not being perfect has transcended to bless so many other areas of my life. There are places and times when good enough is good enough. And so part of self-care, especially relative to social identity, especially for those of us who have learned we do have to be twice as good to get half as far, it is reaching that point when we can accept that we don't have to be perfect in everything. That doesn't mean that we don't strive for excellence, but it just gives us permission to extend ourselves some grace. I want to talk a bit about cultural identity and job performance. When those from marginalized groups internalize the biases, the racism, the sexism, the any other isms that can have such an harmful effect on their job performance, when we internalize those external negative factors, it can in so many ways, it will in so many ways compromise and impair our job performance. One of the ways it shows up is the term, the phrase, the phenomenon, imposter syndrome. And I'm sure some of you all in the audience are familiar with this. It often manifests in those who have external success in some way, but inside they feel like that they're not really successful. In fact, that they are fake, that they are imposter. I never forget reading an interview with Will Smith, and he talked about this imposter syndrome. He acknowledged that he had some of that, but then he spoke about the solution. He spoke about how he was able to take that and use that energy to drive him to do his best work. That's a healthy switch from a weapon to use it as an effective tool. So that's one example of this, of aspects of cultural identity. When they are unfavorable, they can demoralize us. They can plant a lot of seeds of self-doubt. For women, it often shows up where we are more apologetic than we need to be. We're sorry for everything, things that's not even our fault. That's a reflection of that self-doubt. And then when we can take our cultural identity and leverage it as a tool, we learn that our identity is an asset in the organization. The diverse perspectives that we bring are a benefit to the organization when there's an inclusive culture. We understand and embrace a positive self-efficacy, that self-efficacy that tells me, yes, I can. I don't know, matter what it looks like, I can do this. I am good at what I do. I am a good learner. We learn how to effectively self-promote. Emily, I'm watching the clock, so I'm going to speed it up here. But this is so important as far as the outcomes of learning how to leverage our cultural identity. So what, now what? So hopefully I've said a few things that have piqued your interest. What do you do with that? Here are a few suggestions. If you haven't done so already, you may want to consider either finding a mentor or becoming a mentor in a cultural identity mentoring relationship, meaning that you find someone that whatever dimension of diversity, whatever dimension you want to connect on, that you all have that in the mentoring dyad. So for example, again, I see this a lot played out in my LGBTQ friends, that having a professional in your field, if you identify as LGBTQ, having someone else in your profession who also is part of that community can just provide so many insights and motivations. Encourage you, if you can identify one or two areas that we refer to as OFIs, opportunities for improvement. Identify one or two areas that you can say, yes, I do need some help with that. Let me dig deeper and improve upon those areas. Strengthen your skills around learning to accept who you are, but without becoming complacent. So as I accepted that I had a Southern accent, I also didn't want to become so complacent. I said, yeah, whatever. I did what I could to improve. Consider training and coaching, especially in areas of conflict management, building self-confidence, executive presence, and public speaking. Remember that whatever position you're in, you earned that seat. You qualified to be there. You do belong there. That's so powerful. And then along the way, as a foundation of self-care, is to practice discipline, but extend yourself some grace. So as you Sharpen your tools as you work to be the best you. Know that there's no such thing as perfection. And so while you're striving for excellence, extend yourself some grace. And with that, I will say thank you for being the best you that you can be each day. And Emily, I'm open to questions.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Dr. Armstead. This was wonderful. I was nodding my head several times and you made me laugh a couple times too, but I was muted. So thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions. There are several people that have said this is great information, super helpful in the chat. Let me go to how I saw it roll in first. I have Connie Jones raised her hand. I'm going to see if I can allow her to talk. Can you unmute at all so you can talk? Connie Jones, are you there still? Okay, so while I'm trying to figure that out, if you can pop your questions. Oh, yes, you're here. Can you unmute at all, Connie Jones? Oh, I hope you can, so you can ask your question. Okay, let me see. I'm going to go on to the Q&A one while we wait and see if that works, okay? It looks like Doris Winston asked, what advice would you give to one who's trying to explain this RIM experience to a person of a dominant culture?
Great question. So the first suggestion would be to gather a bit more information for yourself so that you understand not only the general aspects of it, but which aspects are most applicable in your specific situation. So getting understanding yourself. And then consider the person who asked and the context. I truly believe in the importance of context. What do you want to leave that person with? What concepts, what next do you want to leave that person with? And in this current environment we find ourselves, particularly since the George Floyd killing, there has been a lot of interest around race and marginalized groups, which is good. And a lot of allies have stepped up and said, I want to learn more, which is good. And in the spirit of self-care, it's important for those of us who may have information to share to not overextend ourselves. In other words, it's not my responsibility to help someone else learn things that they need to learn on their own. So that's one example of you taking the context, learning more and deciding for yourself what you want to share with that person. But some key points I would underscore is that it's a choice on me, the marginalized person, how I manage my identity impressions, meaning that by me saying it's my choice, I'm the one in control. It's such a balance between embracing my social identity, but not allowing it to become where I become a victim. And one of my cautions in this current environment, where it is so welcome and long overdue that there's talk around race and other marginalized groups. And it's just so important that those of us who are in those groups, that we don't internalize it in an unhealthy way where we then buy into the victim mentality. So in that realm, managing how I show up, it's so important that I am the one saying I am making these choices on what I modify. And so it's not some external party that's saying you need to wear your hair differently. No, it's me making that choice. So I think those are key points. that stand out for me, but I would suggest you consider your specifics and find out for yourself, what do you want to communicate to this person?
Okay, let's see. I'm still trying to help out Connie Jones. Just so you know, Connie, on my side, it just says mute. So I'm wondering if you're able to speak. Oh, did you just speak or was that Dr. Armstead? Okay.
Listening to Dr. C is.
Oh, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. You know, just listening to you is so prolific. It's so religious. It's so, I can see myself there. And I can see where you're saying don't become a victim, but maybe turn it around to a more mature person and respond to something that you don't make yourself an absolute victim.
Yes.
And I had that happen to me in the store. I go into this certain store, and I won't say where, but yes, sisters, and some ladies, all ladies have hips, and some men just don't have the finesse to say, oh, that's a beautiful woman, and I love her hips. You know, you might say hello, you might say this or that, but there's no reason to run into someone with a basket. But what I'm trying to get at is just that you phrase it so well that possibly the next time that I incur something like that, I will have my act together and learn how to curtail it and confront it and keep on going about my business, doing my shopping in my favorite store. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you for sharing that. It does take courage and it takes practice, you know, and that's part of, you use the term maturing. I am so grateful that I've been blessed to have, let's say, a few 24 hours behind me. In other words, I'm older now. And
Yes.
I'm grateful that I have matured, that the little girl inside of me might have never said those things, but today I'm like, okay, this is who I am, and I'm still going to be respectful, but I need to stand in my own truth. So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. I'm glad you were able to speak. I do have another question. Linda Williams is asking, what do you think of reverse discrimination?
Yes, absolutely, whatever that means. Okay, so that's a deep question. Let me see if I can answer it relatively shortly, in short fashion. Again, I will say context and motive, meaning whatever way is being brought up. As a D&I practitioner, I would seek to find out what's the underlying, the foundational issue there. It is something that is not uncommon to hear of and not unexpected. I'll give you a clear example, maybe pushing the envelope a little bit, but here we go. After the George Floyd incident and the elevation of the Black Lives Matter, that was a good thing. And I also very early on said, okay, when this 15 minutes passes, what's going to be the pushback? Because the pendulum has swung so far to the other end, talking about balance. And sure enough, in relatively short fashion, there was significant pushback. And I'm not going to go down that lane too far. But in a professional setting, it is so important in the diversity and inclusion work that we are all inclusive, meaning that the work, when it's positioned that it is for the betterment of the whole organization and all the individuals in it, it legitimately incorporates everyone. So it will minimize a honest rebuttal of reverse discrimination, whatever that means. I think too often the reverse discrimination phrase may be a result of those who are in the majority group feeling threatened that something is being taken from them. And so therefore they believe, or at least they explicitly state, ostensibly state, that if this group gets more of something, then that means that I'm going to lose something. That's coming from a mindset, a very limited mindset. So the clock on the wall says I cannot go much deeper than that, but I will say that if you're encountering that, again, dig deeper to find out what's the underlying issue.
And Dr. Armstead, I appreciate the same context because it matters in every situation, absolutely. I do have a question for you, if it's okay with you, if I can put it in the chat for everyone. Someone had asked if I could post your contact for future connection, if possible, an email address maybe, or...
Sure. So I can do that.
I can actually post it for you if you want me to use the Outlook one. Do you want me to use
Yes,
the Outlook one?
yes, that would work well.
I will post it right there for everybody for future reference. And I don't see any other hands raised or any other questions in the Q&A, but this was just a wonderful hour spent with you and hearing from, oh, I do have one more. Oh,
Okay.
2 more hands raised. Hold on. Do you have time?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Verna.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I really enjoyed your presentation. It's really right on, and I'm glad I stuck to it and listened all the way through. Will there be an opportunity for us to this presentation? Is that something that we'll be able to have? And the other thing about my question number 2 is, are there ways to be authentic when it comes to ageism? Do you find those, I mean, yeah, age in the workplace, and how to be authentic or be okay with, having, being maybe a senior person in age, maybe not in the field, but how do one, um, how would one kind of cope with that?
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you for that question. I believe Emily confirmed that the recording will be posted as well as
In the comments. It'll be posted in the comments.
Okay. So great question regarding the ism that all of us will encounter if we keep breathing. So that's a guarantee. If you keep breathing, you will get there. And so from my research, as well as my own personal experience, like I say, like my mother used to say, you're not a spring chicken anymore. So yes, as we know, there are multiple generations in the workplace now. I recently saw it was up to 5 or 6. Those youngins that are coming in, anyway, then those more mature ones who cannot afford to leave. So there's lots of generations in many workplaces. And I believe many of the concepts presented here apply to both ends of the continuum on age. I understand from my younger colleagues that they encounter ageism in another way. Oh, you're too young, you don't know what you're doing. And they often have great ideas and bring, different experiences. So there's isms all along the continuum. I would suggest many of the same concepts here on knowing who you are and the strengths that you bring. As a mature worker, I have experience that informs what I do. Now, I have to be careful not to be so rigid to say, girl, we tried that back in 1975 and it didn't work, so it's not going to work now. you know, but I can bring the experience that this is what we did in 75 and it may apply here. So the same concepts of understanding the strengths that you bring to the table and then sharpening those opportunities for improvement in yourself, you know, doing the things like I have to make a concerted effort to stay up to date with technology because I didn't grow up with a screen in front of me, you know. So sharpening those areas of improvement that you recognize, but also embracing the strengths you bring and knowing how to communicate them in an effective way. That's the short answer. Most importantly, you know, just do you, because no one else can do you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Armstead. And that does bring us to our webinar. We would like to thank you so much. And just as a reminder, this recording will be posted in the Commons for the Center for Teaching and Learning. And thank you everyone so much for joining us today.
Thanks all. Have a great evening.